Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Werme.
Welcome in to the Stay Green podcast, part of Bet the Board Podcast Network, and all in conjunction with Wondery. We put Atlanta in the rear view, where weather was a factor yet again, but still a race that was shaping up to be one of the best in 2023. We shift our attention towards a more predictable race type as the series heads north to the Magic Mile in Loudon, New Hampshire. I'm your host, Derek Yoder, filling in for Todd over the next 2 weeks on the Stay Green episodes, joined by racing analyst, professional sports bettor, and one that would rather sit by the pool than watch a super speedway race, Chris Werme. You know, Chris, I joke with you often when the series goes to tracks like Daytona and Talladega as well as Atlanta, but please tell me you watched a little bit of racing action on Sunday night.
I didn't. I couldn't. It's so hard. Dude, Derek, I have a problem. And my problem is that if I watch a race, I have to live bet it. And I know that long run, I'm going to make mistakes and I'm going to probably lose money. And I wanted so badly to be able to watch the race and not bet it. And it was I watched probably 4 or 5 laps before I thought, well, let me just check the live odds. And then I couldn't do it. So just full disclosure, I followed on Twitter, but I did not actually watch the race. You were there. What was it like? What was it like at the track?
It was amazing. So good to know that you watched a couple laps, and welcome to NASCAR betting, where when you're watching stuff like that happen, you want to get invested. I'm gonna by the end of the year, Daytona, Talladega coming up in a few weeks. I'm gonna get you betting on one of those. You'll take some advice one way or another. But I was in attendance, like you said, Saturday for the Xfinity race, Sunday as well for the Cup Series race. And my goodness, talk about 2 different races. Definitely thought the Xfinity race was going to be a little bit more wild. Kind of with the driver talent that kind of shapes itself that way. It was a little bit more tame than I anticipated. But the Cup Series, I mean, on Sunday, that was just tremendous action. And I know weather played a factor in the guys, maybe getting a little bit more racier than anticipated. I was high on Kyle Larson coming in, Austin Cindric as well. I called them my legacy plays because nobody else in the NASCAR betting industry was even talking about those guys, especially Larson. So when he finished second by a nose at the end of stage 1, boy, oh boy, was I smiling the biggest smile. Now, in stage 2, when he wrecked, I was also frowning about as big as my smile was. That was my frown. But I got to watch the race from the backstretch, during the race, the Cup Series race on Sunday. My goodness, you and I got to watch a little bit at Nashville with the Xfinity and maybe even the Cup Series a little bit. But my goodness, I tell you what, no better place to watch a race than a hybrid super speedway. The racing action was great. Handling was, guys were talking about a little bit more. So great experience, great time. Was able to help a couple people call out the winners, John Hunter on Saturday and Byron on Sunday. So all in all, great experience. And you definitely have to go to a race at night in Atlanta coming up, even though I know you don't love to bet races.
Well, hey, I have a question. So when we went to Nashville and we watched a couple laps on the backstretch there, I loved it because you could see the speed, you could see them kind of coming off of 2, and you kind of see who had the grip on the bottom, and then you kind of see them racing on the backstretch. Were you able to get closer than we were in Nashville? Because there were still some fence. Like, man, you used to be able to get so close. I remember going to Phoenix, the first time I ever went to Phoenix. I'll never forget. I know Johnson won the race. This was like 12 years ago or 13 years ago. I bet Johnson at plus 225. And thinking that was like, someone told me, well, the guy that I used to bet with, he's like, that's actually a pretty good bet. But you could get so close at that time. And I just remember being able to, like, if I actually stuck my arm through the fence, I could actually touch a car. Now they've got you backed off so much. Whenever they're going, 185 miles an hour on the backstretch, they don't want people to be able to reach out and touch the cars. But that's always my favorite place to watch a race. I really enjoy the speed. I really enjoy the speed and the sound. I think it's awesome. But I don't know. Old Atlanta probably would have been a track I want to go to. I'd like to see it wear out a little bit, maybe get away from the super speedway package before I head there. But I know Todd and I are kind of tossing around maybe Talladega,
Yep.
We don't really bet it, so we can go have a good time and party. But until then, I'm still in the sidelines for super speedways or super speedway racing.
I hear you.
It's just not my thing.
I hear you. It's not your thing because you're making, what you're doing and the information you're giving out is obviously very sound. You can't really predict the super speedway as much. So I totally get it. However, when you're there, that racing action, not even from a betting standpoint, just a racing element. If nobody's been to a race, definitely get to one. There's no better place than a NASCAR, whether you're in the infield, in the grandstands, wherever. I was a little bit of everywhere that night. So yes, I definitely recommend going to a race like that. The handling element, you could see the track is definitely starting to give up some of that super speedway element. Kyle Busch talked about it, other drivers as well. So you could see that the two best cars that were flying were Martin Truex. He was getting the high line working like crazy. And also Eric Jones was just flying. He got into a couple guys as well. But, it's definitely worth it. When you mentioned Talladega, I had a couple people come up, and I want to give a shout out real quick to some two individuals, Brock and Jeff Little, who are from Alabama, Chris, and they are huge fans of you and Todd's. They said they were listening to the Stay Green podcast specifically before they were driving down to Atlanta. They saw that I was there, shot me a DM, so they wanted to make sure I said hello. But they said specifically, because they go to Alabama or they go to Talladega every year, the spring race by a million is what they said.
Really?
You, okay. Todd, and us, we need to go to the spring, not the fall. So just keep that in mind in regards to that. So let's do this. For those that maybe are new to the Stay Green podcast, the format works like this. We'll divide things up similar to what a typical NASCAR race is. Stage one, we'll go back with what we learned from the previous week and how we can apply things going forward. Stage two, we're going to talk about a few, NASCAR basic topics, and then we'll go some, topics of hand as well. And then stage three is all about the upcoming race preview, as we again are looking forward to New Hampshire. So, we talked about it a little bit here in stage one, Chris, regarding Atlanta, and you said, maybe not getting invested. You gave out a best bet, which is Chase Elliott. He did finish 13th. Yeah. Obviously, it was a rain shortened race, so we don't really get to know what he would have done. But from an element of, hey, you gave this out, he got another quality finish. So when we're looking ahead to maybe the playoffs, that bodes well for a driver like that.
Well, I think just at this point, I don't like the must-win scenario. I just really do think that Chase is going to need to find a win. And I think that especially when you have weather coming to play, and we're going to talk about it a little bit in stage two, you can be really aggressive with strategy. And, it worked out for William Byron. And I kind of thought that anything, that could have we're coming off of 2 weeks in a row where they've shortened the race. That hasn't happened before in the past. So I thought that Gustafson might get a little bit more aggressive. I don't know how his car was handling. I just thought that, man, he was great here last year. I thought that if they were going to get really aggressive with any car or aero, when it came to, these tracks that are coming up, I thought that this was a good chance for him, kind of a swing and a miss, but hopefully a small swing and a miss. And, like I said, Atlanta's not my favorite track. I wish Chase and Alan and I had all gotten on the same page to try to win this race, but unfortunately, they don't return my text. So we'll just kind of sit here with the best bet as an L, but I definitely like the best bet for this week.
Good to know that Chris Werme has a Chase Elliott Napa team uniform sitting in his closet, ready to go at any point. But it is an interesting thing because we talked about it obviously with Chase Elliott, and in practice, or I should say in qualifying, the Fords dominated qualifying, where they had again about 8 out of the top 10, similar to what they did in the spring, but the Chevys just came to life whenever qualifying happened. So you know that they were more in race trim versus some of the other, blue ovals. They were in qualifying trim. I know you didn't bet anything else from a Cup Series perspective, but there was trucks racing at Mid-Ohio where it was raining a whole monsoon.
Ooh.
Chicago Part 2 was taking place. So what were you on there? What did you see? I'm sure you watched that event at least.
I did watch that, and
Okay,
it got tough. Gosh, Derek, sometimes I want like these, I want the trucks and the Xfinity to put on such a good show, and it was good racing. And to be honest, I mean, there was so much rain on the track when they started. You're like, oh man, I can't believe I bet real money on this. To quote, Skybox and Mark, I bet real money on Ben Rhodes, and I didn't have him before practice and qualifying. I took him after practice and qualifying. I had him at 8-1, and he was a good truck. He got out to the lead. He led the second most laps. I think Ben Rhodes is a gritty guy. It's just so tough with the rain. You throw in the Truck Series talent. I mean, there were spins left and right, and then it turned on. You just don't know. But I did not watch on Sunday, and I didn't have any Xfinity or Cup bets. But I did find it really interesting that all the comments about both door bumper clear, and I don't know if Denny talked about it on his actions detrimental, but the fact that Austin Hill was pissed that no one was going with him. It's like, well, that's what happens when you're beating everybody's ass. Like, no one wants to push you to the lead. So I think that, you can get away with that in the Xfinity Series, like just not pushing a fast car. I think when you get competitive in the Cup Series, man, you got to take advantage of every spot you can on super speedways. But, interesting that Austin Hill is so fast that he did not have anyone willing to push him, which is kind of crazy with the alliances that he has in that series. But, he's won so many of those races at super speedways that it's just funny to hear someone, kind of complain that they didn't have any help.
Yeah, it was interesting. And they did talk about it on all the podcast networks this weekend. And you mentioned it about Austin Hill. If I'm driving, and maybe this is because I'm not a driver, I'm, somebody that produces content, I would be the one that's like, well, I'm going to follow Austin Hill wherever he goes. I'll just act like I'm his best buddy. And then with 3 to go, I'll just sneak out and pass him. If this guy knows how to get to the front, I don't mind working with him to get there. And then I'll make a move late. But like you said, nobody was willing to work with him. Now, they got themselves in trouble. I was on pit road when they were reversing the car after qualifying. And then all of a sudden there was an issue, not only to his car, but his teammate in the 2 as well. Almost the same exact second as they were rolling the cars back. So there was something amiss there with both of them, which obviously they had rocket ships. They got to the front so fast, Austin Hill. So it's definitely was interesting to hear that nobody was willing to work with them. Now, the colleague obviously had all 3 of those cars set, ready to go. And if I'm Daniel Hemrick, and I know he was so upset after the race, I'm thinking to myself, buddy, Justin Haley, my teammate that's dipping down from the Cup Series into the Xfinity Series, how the hell are you not helping me get this victory, making sure that I'm in the playoffs? You don't care at all. So the fact that they didn't work together, and Haley coming out trying to be a good old salesman saying, hey, I was sputtering, you were sputtering, we're all sputtering. We were, the whole field was sputtering. Can't believe it, Daniel. But anyway, sorry about your loss. I could not believe how that ended up playing out, because as I'm watching the race, at the track, I was watching in turn 1, and next thing I know, I'm like, wait, why is the 20 out to such a far lead? What happened here? So when I saw the replay, it was definitely interesting. So obviously you would see it a little bit different as well from that colleague standpoint.
Yeah, team orders, this is not the V8 supercars where we saw SVG just pull over to let his teammate win last week. You got to win, man. You put wins on the board, and you get sponsors, and it was Justin Haley crying, out of fuel was, believable for maybe 10 seconds. But hey, you got to go out there and win the race. Unfortunately, it was his teammate that he left hang out to dry, but we've seen that in the Xfinity Series in the past. We saw it with Ty Gibbs last year, just taking Brandon Jones right out of the playoffs. So you got to get your wins when you get a chance. And so, Justin Haley coming down from the Cup Series, you'd think he'd help out Daniel Hemrick, but hey, I'm not in the race car. So, I don't know. I don't know what that's like, but I'd be pissed. I understand why Hemrick's upset.
I would love nothing more to get you in a Richard Petty driving experience
Yeah,
car. Just get you a
I would
couple
too.
hot laps, see how Chris
Yeah,
Werme does. Obviously, you wouldn't wear a helmet with the hair, we know,
yeah, I don't need
but
that.
it would be cool to see that. So let's do this. Let's kind of shift our conversation now. I want to go into stage 2, where we're going to talk about a few things, which I'm really looking forward to these topics of conversation here tonight. And the first one is going to be expectations versus reality. Really curious. Again, we kind of teased it earlier when it comes to the weather. Weather's going to play a factor yet again, unfortunately. Saturday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you name it, it is going to be an issue. So when going into a betting weekend, Chris, where weather's a factor, how should people, new or experienced gamblers, handicap a wet weather style race?
Well, it's really difficult, but I just want to segment kind of before practice and qualifying versus after. Before practice and qualifying, it is all about making sure you're picking off the best number. I don't think that there's much you can do. Like, oh, if there's going to be rain, it's not like in the Cup Series, these guys are so good. It's really hard to say that one driver is going to be better than another in the rain. It's not like these guys are rain experts. Now, I'm sure there'll be a bunch of people on Twitter that come say, well, this guy and this guy and this guy are way better in the rain, but I don't believe it. I still think that the best handling race cars are going to be the best on rain tires. It's not like Denny Hamlin's going to take a car that was, a top 3 car, and then all of a sudden with rain tires, he's going to be a 20th place car. I just don't buy that. I'm sorry, I'm just not a part of it. I still think that the best cars are going to be good over the longevity of the race. Now, but that's before practice and quality. You want to make sure you're picking off the best number. Like, where is the market going to go? Like, if I don't think that the favorites this week, you see Truex and Chris Bell about 5.5 or anywhere from 4.5 to 5.5 to 1. I don't think you're going to see a reduction in their price, but there's some guys you still want to beat the market. And I think that, you need to predict where the market's going to go early in the week. Then after practice and qualifying, you have a clean slate. Hopefully that the guys you bet on, they beat their price, or they open much lower than you actually were able to lock in a price at, and you can beat the market. However, you have to look at the type of rain. And I'm not a meteorologist. I'm not. But these are like pop-up thunderstorms. Pop-up thunderstorms are quick. They can get the track dried, and then they can get back out there. Now, if you have one of those things where it's like a system moving through and it's going to be rain past a certain point, you better figure out what time that rain is going to come in. Now, these pop-up thunderstorms, if it's, you're in Daytona and all of a sudden there's a pop-up thunderstorm, there's nothing you can do there.
Right.
However, Loudon doesn't have lights. That's the problem. So I think it's really important to understand, if this is a pop-up thunderstorm that we get early in the race, obviously if it's not to halfway, not a big deal. They're going to get restarted at some point. I cannot see the Cup Series doing what the Xfinity Series did at Chicago. I don't think that'll happen at all. So it's almost like, let's get to practice and qualifying, and then you have another race. You have a race to halfway. And then who's going to be the best of the race at halfway? If someone's coming from the rear, it's going to be really hard for them to get to the win at halfway. So maybe stay away from some of those guys. Now, if there's a big system that's coming in, that's completely different. Then they might just be racing to halfway versus a pop-up shower. They get the track dry and move on. So I wish that there was like a perfect formula for a wet weather weekend. There's just not. You just have to pay attention. I mean, that would be my biggest advice to people. Just pay attention. And, the radars work. The people that work in the weather industry, they're really good at what they do sometimes. But I would say, if you think that there's a chance, like last week in Atlanta, was that a pop-up shower, Derek? I wasn't paying attention. Or was it like expected rain?
No, it was expected rain. There was the biggest,
then why the hell did only William Byron stay out? Or, Byron and a couple other people stay out.
There were guys like Brad Keselowski, who was leading at the time. I believe he was leading. He had to come in because he was out of gas. Michael McDowell really should have ran out of gas. Somehow he was able to clutch it enough.
Like
and he
91
made it
laps or
7.
something?
Yep, he did. So he made it, and I don't know if he could have gone another 2 times around the track, they said. So Bubba Wallace kind of did the same. Like, there were just guys talking about, hey, we have to pit because of fuel. And even Brad said, hey, I don't envy your decision here, Matt McCall. You're
Sure.
gonna have to make it, but I trust whatever you do. So it really does play, like you were saying. And we got to preface this when we talk about rain, it is a wet weather tire, and
Sure.
NASCAR's taking the wet weather tires for Xfinity and the Cup Series this weekend, meaning it can't really be raining when the race is going on or when they want the race to go on, because it's just going to make visibility an issue. However, if they have a window where, hey, it's not raining and the track is
Yep.
good enough to put the wet weather tires on, this is where you, now the new or experienced better out there, have an opportunity to watch this. Watch also from the social media standpoint, if Chris and I are even saying, hey, who's going to put slicks on first? If there's a
Sure.
break in the action where
Yep.
the sun's coming out, that's another thing you mentioned, Chris. And then I want to kind of get into the next thing here. But you mentioned as well, hey, New Hampshire, somehow in 2023, there's another track here that does not have lights for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So that is, in 2021, we saw Eric Almirola win on a shortened race.
Yep.
Christopher Bell, who we'll get to later, finished second. But that's just a lot of things. And there's a reason why, unfortunately, we have to talk about this now, because whether you're listening Friday, Saturday, or even Sunday before the race, this is going to be a topic of conversation all week long. So kind of want to throw something back to you. Is there a driver or team that holds an edge, in your opinion, when we are talking about weather? Is there any organization or anybody that really kind of maybe holds a little bit of a tick up when it comes to this weekend?
Man, I wish I knew. Like
What
I
about
said
Hendrick?
earlier, I just think that guys at the cup level are so talented. If it's misting or raining, I still think that the best handling car, the car that looked the best on slicks or on a dry track, will probably be the best unless they really, really struggle in the rain. But I don't see that as much in the Cup Series as I would say like the Xfinity or the Truck Series, where there's just certain guys that have done it enough. I think that these cars are so similar in the Cup Series that as long as they are able to find grip outside of the groove. Remember, whenever you use rain tires, you're not looking for the typical groove. You're looking for out of the groove to find grip. You're trying to find the water to keep the tires cool, to reduce the fall off. If we find ourselves in a situation where these rain tires are falling off a lot, I think you just have to look at the drivers that are good at, managing fall off. I think that's Kevin Harvick, and I think Denny Hamlin falls into that. But also, if the track stays completely wet, I would say the best handling race car in practice and qualifying will probably transfer over in the rain. Only when the track starts to dry and tires start to fall off will you see the guys that are really good at managing tires start to work their way to the front. I would give the edge to Hamlin and Harvick in that situation, but it's not by much, and it's only in the scenario where the track is transitioning from wet to dry. If it's staying wet, I think the best handling car from practice and qualifying will probably be the best car in wet conditions.
Yeah, I think you're right there. What about pit road? We haven't really talked about that. Is pit road, is there an advantage to somebody having the number one stall versus, maybe, we talk about openings all the time, but what about that number one stall specifically? Is there any reason why, maybe New Hampshire should have a tick up for somebody that has
Yeah,
a
I mean, it's a
premium?
slight tick. It's not
Okay,
like some of the other pit roads we've seen. I think that there
sure.
are other pit roads that are more important,
Okay.
or at least more valuable. Now in the rain, I don't know. We just
Yeah,
haven't seen rain at this track, or really rain on an oval outside of Martinsville with the truck. So
true.
I can't give an edge to anybody.
Okay.
Obviously, anytime you're clean in or clean out, I mean, that's really, really important. And I would say, they're I would rather have clean out, but that's just me, because that way you can quick get to the gas. But if you don't have clean in, you're gonna have a tough
Yeah.
out anyway. So I can't say that there's an edge one way or the other there. The first pit stall is important, but I would say there's other tracks where it's more important than Loudon.
Well, we'll let the Mother Nature kind of take care of things here going into this week, and I don't want to really dwell on some of those negatives of the weather, but really, again, we're going to see it Friday, Saturday, Sunday, where I think if we are lucky enough, if you will, where we know rain's going to happen on Sunday, I hope we see it on Saturday, where we're able
Yeah.
to see, okay, who ran well in the rain, how are we going to handicap this? And yes, it's so true. You said it earlier. Our buddy Mark says it as well. We really do bet on this, even when it's raining. So
I
let's do this.
I
Yeah,
just
go
want it
ahead.
consistent. I just want
Yeah,
it consistent.
that's
If we're
true.
gonna
That's
race in the
exactly it.
rain, let's practice
Yep.
in the rain. If we're gonna
Yep.
race in the dry, let's practice in the dry. I just
Yep.
want consistency. That way we have an apples to apples comparison. The one thing I do hate is like, oh, we practice on rain tires and all of a sudden we have a dry racetrack. It's like, I don't know how to handicap that as well as I do where it's an apples to apples comparison. So I don't care if it's raining in the race as long as it
Right.
rains in practice. And then these guys have a good understanding of the car, and we also have a good understanding of the car. But when you
Yep.
have, you kind of flip flop, that's when it gets really difficult.
Well, hopefully for your stake specifically, obviously taking off pretty much what you did in Chicago. Obviously, you took off last week at Atlanta. I'm
Yeah.
hoping for you, you're able to kind of get back to it and really handicap an event. I know you really like handicapping New Hampshire, so I can't
Love
wait
it.
to talk about that in the upcoming stage. But let's just stay here. We'll get off of the weather conversation and let's get back to some of the things regarding the importance of explanations. I know you talk about this, and you and I talk about it at times regarding explanations and why they are key. You're kind of big on this. So, as the NASCAR industry, the betting industry really keeps growing, why, in your opinion, are explanations key? Because I think for a lot of your audience that's maybe coming in new, the summer's getting really busy here. There's a lot of people maybe wanting to understand explanations. Why is that so important? So, why is that?
Well, I think it's the easiest way to learn.
Hmm.
Someone could say last week that they thought William Byron had the best car and that's why he was going to win the race. But if you actually thought that, you might have been right and you would have the outcome correct. When in fact he was good, but he wasn't great. You know what I
Right.
mean? So he actually won based on strategy. So I think that it's really important in the age of social media where someone is hitting a big outright every single week. Every time I hop on Twitter after a race, someone hit someone the winner big. It's just really important to stay the course and understand why you actually won that race. The cool thing about betting on sports or betting in general is it's an accountability to accuracy. How
Hmm.
right were you? But it's really important to understand whether you were right or you got lucky. And the only way you can actually decipher that is you actually have an opinion as to why a bet won or an explanation for that matter. And
Hmm.
that way you can go back and say, hey, I was right about my explanation. Or I was wrong about my explanation. That way you don't get so caught up in outcome bias. There's so many times when people say, well, I got it right, so I was right. Well, did you get it right or did you get lucky? A perfect example is Alan Cavanagh came on here 2 weeks ago to talk about the Chicago race, and he brought up SVG, who went on to win the race. But he had a great explanation. He said SVG is a great road course racer, and the key is he has bumpers. And he's used to racing cars where you can actually beat and bang a little bit. He's used to the weight of the race cars. That was a perfect explanation. It turned out to be right. So,
Hmm.
um, you know, it's very important that you attach that explanation. Now, you don't need to do it publicly, but you need to, like in your mind, think to yourself, why did you bet something? Because if you just blindly bet something, you could think you were right, even though you got lucky. So if you actually want to learn, you want to make sure that your explanation is at least you can do the scientific method. You can test whether your explanation was right. And then from there, you can actually make your explanation more specific and actually get smarter. And that's why I'm
Hmm.
always like, hey, I don't care if you won your bet. What was your explanation for winning? Because the goal is to get better and better every week.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. And as we see, the social media element, Twitter, or maybe you're on Threads, Chris, now, and you just see different elements, continuing to grow. There's a lot more handicappers coming in, a lot more
Yeah,
content creators that are really trying to get their name out there because this is an industry that's growing. And I've also seen it as well, where you kind of get on the same guys are winning every Sunday, supposedly, but also guys are just kind of putting out different plays. So it is
sure.
interesting. Is there an example on social media as we're talking about this that where somebody does a good job in explaining their reason?
I haven't really paid attention,
Okay.
but it
Yep.
usually stands out. Like you can see it. Like I can give an example of like a bad explanation.
That's good.
Like
Let's do that. Yep.
An example of a bad explanation would be a bad explanation would be like, well, Kevin Harvick has won there. Yeah, no shit. Kevin
Yeah.
Harvick has won
Yeah.
everywhere. So if it explains everything, it actually explains nothing. Right.
True.
So when you say Kevin Harvick is good at Phoenix, well, why is he good at Phoenix? And we saw it a great race why Kevin Harvick was great at Phoenix. He was so good in 1 and 2. What was it that he could do? He could drive it in a little deeper. He could cut below the white line, and he was able to drive off and get that thing turned straighter than anybody. It's why he passed William Byron. It's why he passed, Kyle Larson, and was going on to win the race before the caution came out. That's a great explanation. And the more specific you can be with your explanation, the more you can learn from it, which is the same reason why I didn't think Kevin Harvick was going to be great at Richmond, just because it was the same tire as Phoenix. The more specific you can be with your explanations, the more equipped you are to have a better explanation for another race. If you just say Kevin Harvick has won there, well, he's won everywhere. So if it explains everything, it actually explains nothing. So the other thing would be like, Kevin Harvick's also good at Michigan. Why is he good at Michigan? Well, it's not because he can wrap below the white line,
the white
one
line.
and two. Yep. It's because he's able to keep his momentum up, and that's why he's really good. So what other tracks that are super high momentum where you have a lot of on throttle time, where is Kevin Harvick? Where does that actually transfer? Because that's the true explanation, not just the fact he's won there or he has a great finish. So I think that it's really important to understand it. I'm a big explanation guy, and I will change my mind in a heartbeat. And you've done it to me before. Like we talk before every race. We have a conversation about an hour going over our bets. If you put up a good explanation, I will put up a little bit of a fight. But if your explanation is better, I'll change my mind. I think that's really important. And that's why you have to be able to attach an explanation to a bet in order to make money long run and in order to learn and get better every week.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And like you said, it's a good exercise that we do, but I think a good challenge out there is for everybody to kind of get back into that mindset and try to really, kind of live by that. Because like you said, I mean, if we can put an explanation out there, not just putting something on Twitter or talking to a buddy or doing whatever, putting it in a group of saying this guy now, like why now? Because there's people out there going to do that. So let's do this. Let's put a bow. That'll put a bow then on stage 2. Let's move into stage 3 now. We'll do our run to the finish where, we're able to talk about the upcoming race, because I know you and I both are really looking forward to the racing action this weekend. And kind of said what it is earlier. We're going to go to New Hampshire. The Xfinity and the Cup Series are. So on Sunday, the Cup Series is going to run the New Hampshire race, which is a 1.0858 oval, 301 laps. Yes, that magic mile is there for a reason. Stage 1 will have 75 laps. Stage 2 will have 110 laps. And that final run to the finish will be 116 laps in stage 3. Wet weather tires, we talked about it. Yes, NASCAR brought them this weekend. Lights, again, no lights this weekend. But the tire test, and I think this is an interesting place to start, where the tire test back in April, which was a very important tire test. And when I saw Goodyear in Atlanta on Sunday, kind of talked to them about this, where they were talking about, hey, Brad Keselowski with the Ford, Chevy had Chase Elliott, and Toyota Christopher Bell. I think those 3 names are going to be very important to some of our conversations here tonight. But this tire is a little bit more of a fall off. Will it add a little bit more grip? Hopefully we're not having to have any factor of weather, because that'll just change the whole complexity as it is. So Chris, anything from that tire test, specifically those 3 that you want to kind of hone in on first?
Well, I just think that the tire test is a little bit like running the Xfinity Series race. I always say you're about one adjustment ahead. And I think just the expectation and knowing what it's like when you sail it off in practice, you're able to kind of get up to speed faster. You understand where your braking spots are, just basically hitting your marks. I think it's an advantage. I wouldn't say it's much more than just having the Xfinity race. It's not like I don't think that those 3 guys are just going to go out there and lead all the laps, but I do think it just gives you kind of one adjustment ahead. You understand where your car is going to go. But other than that, it was April. It's probably going to be a little bit warmer. Probably going to see hopefully a little bit more fall off, but I wouldn't take too much more than just one adjustment ahead of the field.
Okay, so then let's do this because, like you said, I mean, it was a different time of the year as well, and given some of the weather elements, it could be a little bit different. So let's do this. I'm curious to hear from you. You know, we talk about track comps a lot. What, from your estimation, are you looking at, and what are you pulling for to kind of build some of your explanations from a track comparison standpoint when we look at New Hampshire?
Yeah, I mean, okay, we're gonna hear a lot of Phoenix, a lot of Richmond,
Yep.
maybe some Gateway, maybe some Martinsville, but I just genuinely think that this is kind of a standalone track
Okay.
in that matter. Like, if there was a direct correlation to Phoenix, Kevin Harvick, who's won 10 times at Phoenix, would have way more wins at Loudon than he does. You could
Hmm.
say the same for Denny Hamlin at Richmond. Gateway, we don't have enough data on. I think you carry more speed throughout the track at Gateway. I think that the braking's a little bit different. So I look at those because I think it's important that the setups are there, but ultimately I do think this is a little bit of a standalone track, kind of like a Nashville that's also standalone. I'm not saying that they're comparable, but I think that Nashville's like some other tracks. I think that
Hmm.
Loudon is like some other tracks, but I don't think you can just look at Phoenix or Richmond or Gateway or Martinsville, kind of mush them all together and have it spit out who they think is going to be best. I think it's going to be a lot of more momentum based and then historical success. And,
Okay.
only having run this track one time last year, it's not like we have a ton of data, but I think you have to kind of look at last year's race a little bit and then current form this year would be my the two things that I'm looking at the most closely when it comes to handicapping the race.
That helps then, because I was going to go right into kind of what's the biggest thing that you're looking for from a driver slash team pre-qualifying and practice. But you kind of hit it on the head there, where you're kind of talking about, hey, it's obviously price dependent. We know that, and
Sure.
it is tied to performance. So, some of the drivers, and you were talking about it a little as well. Anything else there with that, or that
I
kind of,
just think early in the week we got to beat the market. Like, the
yeah.
last thing you want to do is punch a ticket this point in the week. Let's just say at a random, doesn't matter. Denny Hamlin at 8-1, and then he
Hmm.
opens after practice and qualifying at 12-1. You're just shooting yourself in the foot. So I think it's really important to just make sure that you're beating the market early in the week, because then you can get out of your bets a little bit easier, especially when it comes to a head-to-head matchup. If you're going to get into a head-to-head matchup, let's just say you're playing someone at -125. Well, you better hope like hell that it at least opens at -125 or steeper. If it gets to
Yeah.
-160, if you don't like the bet, you can get out without it costing you any money. So I think right now we're just trying to beat the market. That's kind of what I'm thinking with my the best
Hmm.
bet towards the end of the show. But you have to do that at this point in the week. We can't just pick a winner,
Right.
on a Wednesday when we haven't seen practice and qualifying. We got weather on the
Sure.
way, which just breaks my heart. Maybe gives me a little heartburn. But yeah, we
Well,
got to beat the market.
Well, we don't want you having any heartburn yet. We don't need that. So let's do this. Let's talk about a few drivers. That's why kind of the people came to listen here tonight. We got a lot of guys to kind of talk about. So I'm curious to kind of hear some of your opinions. Obviously, breaking news: Christopher Bell, pretty damn good when it comes to racing at
Yeah.
New Hampshire. If you look at what he's done in the trucks in 2016, all the way through Cup in 2022, he's either finished first or second in various series. 38th was his worst place finish in 2020 in the Cup Series. Everything else, first or second. So pretty darn good there with that. I'm just curious, obviously firing off about 4.5-1, opened at about 6-1. That number's
Yeah.
been bet down, obviously, at 4.5. So anything we want to look at, you're telling the people, hey, maybe this is a number to invest in, or hey, that price is a little too short. Maybe hold off and
Too
we'll look
short.
elsewhere.
Yeah.
Too short.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Okay.
I can't blame
All right.
anyone for liking Chris Bell. I just don't like the
Sure.
price. I feel like the price is the most important thing, and it's always probably the most important thing. Now, listen, if Chris Bell goes out and pulls it and leads a billion laps, I'd be really surprised. I don't think we haven't seen that speed out of him. And even when he won last year, it wasn't like he started on the pole. I mean, he methodically worked his way up there. He
Mm-hmm.
took advantage of some slow stops from the 4 and the 19. And then was able to. He's great on the long run. Listen, I'm not trying to take anything away from Chris Bell, but you're telling me that a guy that hasn't led a ton of laps this year, you're going to put him off at 4.5 or 5-1. I'm just not buying it. I mean, that 2020 race. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that when it started raining and you had the Gibbs boys? I think Kyle Busch, Truex, and Denny
2021.
Hamlin all hit the wall.
I think that was
Was that?
2021. I think that was
Oh, that was
Almirola's win.
2021. Okay,
Yep.
gotcha.
Yeah, like you
Oh,
said.
you're right. That was 2021. Yep, you're right.
Yeah.
And that's when he was able to finish second behind Almirola. Yep, that's
Correct.
right.
Yep.
I
And they
just think,
shortened the
listen,
race.
he's going to be good, but I think if
Yeah.
you're more patient, I think you'll see a better price in that 4.5 or 5 to 1. And like I said, we're trying to beat the market right now, and betting him at 4.5, 5, 6 to 1 is not going to do that.
Yeah, so Christopher Bell, just for a couple people that are listening out there that are curious, what are some of his last or recent finishes? He has 2 top 10s in his last 7 races. He has 6 top 10s in his first 8 races to start 2023. So that 20 team really needing to kind of get it going before the playoffs really kick off here in September. It's going to be interesting to see what happens there. Let's move to a teammate of his, Martin Truex Jr. And depending what book you're shopping, you can maybe find him around 6 to 1. So Martin, has a top 10 in 6 of his last 7 New Hampshire starts. The good, the bad, the ugly for him this year since Bristol Dirt. Martin Truex obviously has 2 wins, which is good, Dover, Sonoma, but he also has 8 top 10s in those last 12 races. But 4 of the finishes of those 12, 27th or worse. So we saw what he did in the short flat tracks. You touched on it. Phoenix, he had 17th. Richmond, he was 11th, and Gateway 5th. What is your outlook perspective for Martin Truex? Same question. Short price, look elsewhere?
Okay.
Or do you like this?
This is, man, Derek, I like this the most of the outrights, of a couple outrights. And here's why. He opened in Vegas at 7 to 1 at Westgate, and Westgate's typically the sharpest book.
For sure. Yep.
And then instantly Chris Bell got bet down from 6 to 1 down to 5 to 1. They took Martin Truex from 7 to 1 to 8 to 1. Well, now if you look, Martin Truex is 5.5 to 1. I wish I had pulled the trigger at 8 to 1. And the only reason I did that is, in past weeks at tracks where Truex has been really good, which is, I want to talk about Darlington. Darlington is obviously a great track for Truex. And when I was on Dirty Mo with Letarte and those boys at Dirty Mo, I did not think that at Nashville, if Truex looked good, that his 8 to 1 price would get reduced down to 5.5 or 6 to 1. Well, I was wrong, because he went off at like 5 to 1. Him and Chastain were the 2 best cars in practice and qualifying. And although I do not like this 5.5 to 1 price, I did like that 8 to 1. Now, obviously we can't get it. I'm not going to talk about prices we can't get, but I think that it's important to recognize where driver prices can go. At 8 to 1, I thought there was a little bit of value, because I thought he could maybe open at 4 or 5 to 1. If he pulls it, it looks good in practice. But at this point, now he's 5.5 to 1 or 6 to 1 some places. Now there is a 7 to 1 out there. I might try to eat that up before this goes live. But I think of all the favorites in the race, I do think that Truex has the best chance. He's great on short flats. He's got a lot of momentum. I think that him and James Small, they have something going on. I think he's going to make a deep run in the playoffs. And I think that we could see that 19 car in victory lane. If you have 7 to 1, I think that that's worth a nibble.
Yeah, I think you might be right. And if you look back, I mentioned earlier here, Richmond, he finished 11th. Well, there was a lot of conversation amongst those two. James Smalls is crew chief, and obviously Martin Truex, where Smalls had no tires left, put him on old scuffs, did not tell his driver, hey, buddy,
tell him.
Nope, just didn't tell him, just forgot. Hey, Martin thinks that there's an issue. So, but he still finished 11th. So maybe if he had a solid finish there at Richmond, maybe we'd be looking at it a little bit different from an odds perspective. But you said, hey, if you can find a 7-6 out there as well, grab that now before practice and qualifying. How about his teammate? Again, another JGR guy, final JGR guy we'll talk about, unless you really want to talk about Ty Gibbs. Denny Hamlin, 7 to 1, depending where you're shopping around. On non-road course and super speedway tracks since Charlotte for Hamlin has a 2nd at Gateway, a 3rd at Nashville, right? So that's pretty good when you take out some of those other wild card races. He also has 7 top 10s and 5 top 5s as well. When we look at the short flats, this is interesting, Werme, and I want to kind of give it over to you, but he finished 23rd at Phoenix. However, he had an average running position of 6th. He finished 20th at Richmond, had an average running position of 10th, and finished 2nd at Gateway. So what gives with Hamlin? Should we be buying into that price?
Oh man, here's the thing. Now there's a new tire this week that we haven't seen. and
True.
it's supposedly more aggressive with more grip early in the run with more fall
We might
off.
not see it. If it rains,
Yeah, we might see
won't
just
see it.
rain tires.
Yep.
Yeah, and by the way, it's pouring right now here. I'm here in
Okay.
Michigan. Good old Kalamazoo,
Yeah.
Michigan, with my mom.
No,
Anyway,
nothing like rain in Michigan now today on a Wednesday, moving its way on over
yeah,
to
moving its
Sunday.
way.
So,
Yeah, it
yeah.
should be.
So there
Yeah,
it goes.
based on my
Take it.
calculation, it should be allowed by practice on Saturday. Perfect. But here's the thing with Denny Hamlin: if this tire, and I know he's been preaching on his podcast, if this tire does have fall off, I love Denny Hamlin. I love Denny Hamlin, and I also love Martin Truex Jr. I think I love all the Gibbs guys. If there's a ton of fall off, I'll get to the other guys that I like, but you talk about Truex, Hamlin, Bell. I'm gonna leave Ty Gibbs out of this, but those three guys, if there's tire fall off, man, look out. They could run 1, 2, 3 all day. I anticipate, maybe Truex a little bit more front end speed, and then Denny Hamlin and Chris Bell kind of having that long run speed. I like Denny, and man, he's a gamer. He went out there and he put it on the pole in Chicago. We had never seen this track before. Obviously, ran out of talent on the third lap. The race, but he's a guy that's just a gamer, and I like betting on Denny. It's a little bit shorter price than I'd like, but man, if there's going to be fall off, I think you could see that 7-1 price, especially if they get some long runs in practice. Like, let's just say Denny goes out there and runs 35 laps in practice and he feels really good. You'll see a price of 5-1 or even lower on him.
Yep.
I'm optimistic on him. I'm a little bit more optimistic on Truex than I am Denny. I think he's just showing more speed week in and week out than Denny. Denny's kind of manufactured his speed on these road courses, whether it was Sonoma or Chicago. But Truex was super fast. I guess Hamlin was really fast at Nashville too, but I still think that Truex was, a tick or two faster than him. I anticipate him being a tick or two faster this week, on the short to mid. But if we get into a really long run, Denny Hamlin could be really strong.
Well, now it goes back to what we were saying earlier about explanations, right? I mean, you look at Denny Hamlin's finishes at what he did at Phoenix and Richmond, and you think, guys, why are we even talking about this guy? But when you look at the average running position, you can make an argument for him.
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely.
Let's do this. Let's move into our first double-digit guy. That's 10-1 currently. You can shop around and find the best number wherever you're available to find that. Kyle Larson at 10-1. We haven't seen Kyle Larson open at 10-1 unless it's a super speedway. So now going up to New Hampshire, Larson's average finish this year, 16.3. It is his worst since 2014, and good reason for that. Obviously,
Crazy.
The last 6 races this year, he hasn't finished. I mean, he just hasn't finished last week at Atlanta. So it's really interesting. When we look at the short flats again, finished 4th at Phoenix, 1st at Richmond, 4th at Gateway. Numbers look good. Double digit, 10-1. We like this, or are we passing? There's
Listen, if you came to me and you said, "Hey, Larson won," was arguably the best car at Phoenix. He won at Richmond, won at Martinsville. You're going to give me 10-1 on Kyle Larson. I'd take it. Well,
right.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you're wrong.
It's a good price. It's a good price to have on your card.
It's not bad. I'm going to say here, I'm going to be, I don't have a feel on this. I think it's probably properly priced. I cannot see Kyle Larson hanging on when there's a ton of tire fall off, when there's not a high line for him to lead on the boards.
True.
I would say that's if this was a place where it had, a ton of tire wear and he could rip the high line, he could enter high and exit high. I do think, obviously this would be a pounder in that case, but a short flat track, I'm not excited about Larson on the long run. Now, I do think that there might be some value in him where if he qualifies in the top 3, I think we could see him maybe open 7, 8-1. So if you wanted to add him for protection's sake, I do think that Larson at 10-1 is not a bad price, but I do think we're going to see some significant fall off out of that 5 car, especially if this tire actually does what it's supposed to do.
I think I said this on the Twitter Spaces show here on Wednesday nights, but I don't think Chevy has won at New Hampshire in the last 16 races, or maybe one in the last 16. So Chevy just has not been the victory lane, and we know how dominant they have been throughout. You go to any track and it's like, Chevy everywhere leads the manufacturer wins here and there. So let's do this, kind of getting off of Kyle Larson, and I'm curious to hear what you have to think about this driver, Kevin Harvick, who obviously races Ford, number 4 car, final year for Kevin. loves this place. I don't think we can deny that. In his last 9 races as a whole in 2023, he's got 1 top 5, 1 top 10. He is currently 126 points above the cut line, which is very pivotal at this point. However, he finished 24th at Nashville, 29th at Chicago, 30th last week. So he's coming in from a momentum standpoint pretty damn bad. Harvick has won 3 of the last 8 New Hampshire races, however. So I'm putting you on the spot here, Chris. SHR, Kevin Harvick, can we see them pull out a surprise W? And would it be a surprise if they ended up winning this weekend?
I don't think it's a surprise.
Okay.
I think unfortunately last year he was like a 25-1, which case I love that price last year. I don't know if you listened to the podcast last year, that I gave out a 25-1 winner. I thought he was going to win this thing. Now, this year a little bit different. I think that that Ford team has really set themselves apart as that top SHR car. Not that it was even close last year, but I mean this year it's he's miles ahead. But he's also done a good job of qualifying better and actually kind of running in the top 5. Now, I don't have stats right in front of me, but just my eyeballs are telling me that Kevin Harvick is more in the mix this year than he was last year. And I don't know if people are going to agree with that or not, because at this point in the season last year, he had no wins. Same this year. Listen, I like Kevin Harvick, and if there's going to be fall off, there's no one more patient. And I think that you could see after 30 or 40 laps, this 4 car could start to work its way to the front. However, again, the goal is to try to beat the market. And at this point in the week, I can't see this guy going on there. I don't even think he'll qualify, maybe qualify in the top 5, but I doubt it. I think he's looking at an 8th to 15th place starting spot. I think we'll probably see a better number later in the week. I do think he will be competing for the win. If there's a lot of fall off, I think him and Denny Hamlin will end up being the favorites.
Okay. Well, I just did a quick eyeball test of what he's done in 2022 versus 2023. And if finishing 11th is good, well, then 2023 is where he is kind of doing well, where last year he had a couple top 3, top 5 finishes. Obviously, we know that it's not been the greatest of years for SHR, but I'm curious, as maybe we get through some of the other conversations here tonight, guys like Ryan Preece, hometown kid, raced out here. Alan Cavana. Did you know Alan Cavana was racing around some of these boys? They were racing together.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yep. So he was a racer up in the Connecticut area and raced with Ryan Preece. Also, Chase Briscoe. I talked to Chase last week. He's been eyeing this race as well. So maybe we'll see a little something out of SHR. But let's do this, Chris. Let's move to another Chevy. Kyle Busch, guy that right now is going off at about 11-1. I want you to kind of listen to some of these statistics because he is coming in with a lot of momentum. Obviously rallied last week. You didn't watch it, but I'll tell you, thanks to rain, he finished 5th. So another,
nice.
He's 12 top 10 finishes this year, which is a series best. 7 straight races now, 9th or better. So momentum is on his side, which I know you like that when we're talking about Kyle Busch. Kyle Busch 11-1. You like that?
No, I mean,
it depends where the
last time I feel like Kyle Busch was like 11 or that 12-1 range was at Gateway. And I was like, I don't know. I mean, if he pulls it and then he pulled it and then goes out there and beats the brakes off everybody. Now, the difference between this week and at Gateway is I think that Kyle's done a great job of running well at places where Reddick ran well last year. Reddick ran well at Gateway. He was not as good at Loudon.
He was not.
Now, Loudon's a completely different animal, and Kyle Busch is good at Loudon. So I'm not going to say that just because Reddick was not as good at Loudon as he was Gateway, that Kyle Busch is going to struggle. However, I think that, the setup of that 8 team has kind of, they've been transferring those over to Kyle Busch. And listen, I don't think we're going to see Kyle at like less than 8-1. But hey, if someone came to me and said, I'm a Kyle Busch guy, right? Like right now I have a lot invested in his futures. I am looking for the positives wherever I can. And so I think it's important for my biases to be put aside. I think that there's other guys that are just have more raw speed than Kyle Busch. Now, talent, I mean, he's as good as anybody. But right now, I mean, this could come back and bite me in the ass. I'm going to wait.
Oh, good.
I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait on Kyle Busch. And you know what? Mainly because I don't see his price dropping to like 5 or 6 to 1. I don't think he's going to pull it. I think that, if he starts at 6th, 7th, or 8th place, maybe we get him at 9 to 1. But I want to know how these guys are in the long run before I put out some major positions.
Yeah, I think that's smart. It's just interesting, and I'm curious. I need to do a little bit of shopping around, but again, I've rattled off, how many top 10s. He leads the series, his 7 races now in a row, 9th or better. So I'm curious maybe what his top 10 numbers are out there. I know each book is different, so maybe that's a opportunity for the better out there. Let's do this. Let's go to the next guy that is also a Chevy winner last week in Atlanta. Leads the league right now with wins with 4. Is there lack of respect right now for William Byron, who's coming off about 12 to 1? I mean, he's behind 7 drivers, depending what book you're looking at, and guys that include, and we'll get to him next, Chase Elliott, but we already talked about Kevin Harvick. But when you look at what he's done the last, he's got 8 top 10s in the last 10 races, and he's got 5 in the top 5s in the last 5 or 10 races as well. Won Phoenix. He was wrecked late at Richmond by being, what was he, 3rd, 4th by Ross, and then scored a top 10 at Gateway. So help me figure out why is William Byron. And there's a lot of people right now, Chris, that obviously they watch the Chicago broadcast. They're getting into this new fandom. They're getting invested in the sport. They see William Byron. Now they're like, oh my gosh, I think the book's messed up. I'm going to take this 12 to 1 number. Should they take it?
Man, if someone...
It's hard to say
I like the explanation more than I like the price, right?
Yes.
So if someone were to come to me and say, hey, I'm taking William Byron at 12 to 1 because he's won the most races this year. He's had the most speed. He's qualified the best. I'd go,
great pit crew.
Yeah. Okay. And great pit crew. That's a great point, Derek. I think that, it's easy to overlook that because you hope at the end of the year that you have the good and the bad luck kind of equal out, right? Yep. You're going to have the guys you bet on have good stops and bad stops, and you hope that it's going to equal out the end of the year, and it's going to be a net 0 for you ultimately. Mm-hmm. But this 24 team has been on it. And if they qualify well, damn, they find their way off pit road more than anyone else. We'd have to look at the win the race stats with Ryan Stevens to actually figure that out. But I'm telling you, I'm kind of shocked at the price. It has to be because of his fall off. But listen, he wasn't good at Phoenix. Went out and won there this year. Now he probably was a 2nd or 3rd best car. Same, you look at Darlington, 2nd or 3rd best car, but you know what? He hangs around. He does not make the big mistakes that some of these other guys have made. You look at Hamlin's made some mistakes. You look at Larson's made some mistakes. Chase Elliott's made some mistakes. William Byron hasn't made many mistakes. He's kind of had that season like the 24 team had last year. And getting the good finishes. And if you put yourself just in the first 2 rows on the last restart, anything can happen. So I don't hate Byron at 12 to 1. I don't hate it.
I think you talk about it all the time, right? Let's beat the market. What is going to help us beat the market?
Yeah, well, and that's a guy. He ain't going to 18 to 1.
No,
I mean he's a guy that's only his odds are only going to drop. So the more I talk about it out loud, the more I like William Byron, and that's why we like to do this. That's why we actually have these conversations. Is like, where is William Byron's price going? Is he going to 16 to 1? I don't think there's a chance in hell of that. Now maybe, I guess, but ultimately I see him going off 8 or 9 to 1. And if you want to steal a little point, a couple of points of value, I don't hate it. I like it more for protection than I do like picking the guy that's going to win, because I think that someone else, I think that the 19, the 4, and the 11 are kind of the guys to win the race, but William Byron would be some great protection.
Chris, you and I both know that if William Byron even got to 16 to 1, 18 to 1, even Todd, he's chasing Simba right now, not trying to get him by any lines. He's going to be running to the pay window wherever there is one, saying, William Byron, racing in America, I need to put money on him now. So that number's never happened. They'll be the biggest liability for all the books if they do that. So let's do this. Let's move to his teammate. Again, firing off around the same number. The NASCAR's most popular driver, which I do believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, is why we see a lot of shorter prices on this guy, because we know, the books know, that he's going to get bet on regardless of track, regardless of whatever his strengths and weaknesses are. Just given the name, he was the runner-up here last year in 2022, currently 60 points behind the playoff cutoff, which is a major deal for NASCAR and him. And we're talking about Chase Elliott. He's been 13th or better in 10 races since returning from injury, which is a big thing, and we'll get to that here in a second as well. But Chase has not been the best HMS driver in 2023. So how should we look to bet him on a weekly basis? And again, when we look at the comp tracks, he missed Phoenix with an injury. He missed Richmond with an injury. And then Gateway, he was suspended after deliberately wrecking Denny Hamlin on the front stretch, which you were eyewitness of. So how do we look to bet Chase Elliott, runner-up last year?
Yeah, those are good points, Derek. I think
thank you.
It's hard to interpret whether the missed races is good news or bad news, because he misses Phoenix.
The 9 car's been not fast, so maybe
not
it's
fast, but but Josh Berry was decent at Martinsville, and I know he's a short track guy.
Yeah.
I can't remember his finish at Phoenix. I think it was pretty decent at Richmond. I remember him being up there towards the front. And then Gateway, I think I'm not going to include Gateway that much. I just feel like, and I could be wrong, but I'm not going to include Gateway too much. I think it's just such a one-off track that I don't want to place too much emphasis on that. And you go back and look, and that was LaJoie was in that 9 car.
Correct.
And Carson Hocevar outran him in LaJoie's car. So, like, you know,
I knew you'd take advantage of
anytime I'm in Portage, Michigan. Shout out Hocevar. He's from here.
Yeah.
But I'm not high on Chase Elliott. I'd rather just kind of wait and see with this guy. He hasn't blown the doors off anybody lately. And they haven't even had they've had solid runs, but they haven't had, they haven't done what Byron's been able to do, is just consistently run in the top 5 and put themselves in position to win. At this point, I'm out on Chase.
Absolutely. I agree. I mean, even what he did at Chicago, yes, he finished 3rd, never should have been in that position unless NASCAR gave him a big break. But he did finish top 10 in his return back at Martinsville. And then Josh Berry in the car, finishing runner up at Richmond. And then, like you said, LaJoie, ran the car at Gateway. So let's do this. Let's move to one of his best friends, Ryan Blaney, 16-1, or depending what number you're finding right now. In his last 4 races in 2023 for Ryan Blaney, finished 9th. Last week at Atlanta, 31st, 36th, 33rd. Chris, correct me if I'm wrong. 30th place positions, not great. But when you look at short flats, 2nd at Phoenix, 26th at Richmond, 6th at Gateway. Which Ryan Blaney do we get? A good Ryan Blaney, a bad Ryan Blaney?
You tell me. I mean, if
me,
if you look at the last 7 races, he's got a 31st, a 36th, and a 33rd, and then that's accompanied with a 9th, a 1st, a 6th, and another 9th. We've only seen him be the fastest guy at Charlotte, and it was albeit a dominating performance. But usually a lot of off throttle time does not bode well for this 12 team and just Ryan Blaney in general. He'll be the first to say he struggles with tire wear. If this tire falls off, more than the wear that we saw at Phoenix, Richmond, or Gateway, or Martinsville, I think unless he gets out front and qualifies super well, I think it's going to be hard for Blaney to make up spots later in runs. 16 is not terrible, but I don't know. You can't bet everybody. I'm going to wait on Ryan Blaney.
That's a great line that you just said, and I wish you and Todd would make T-shirts. Can't bet everybody. You used to do a segment on your pre-race poll called "Who Ain't Winning?" I'll tell you, Ryan Blaney, he ain't winning this week.
All right, I agree.
I'm off on Blaney now. Watch him go win, and then you can laugh at me next week, which then I'll just retire after that on the show. So Chastain, let's talk about him real quick. I got 2 more guys here, Chastain included, and then anybody else that we didn't get to touch on, but we're giving the people a lot of drivers to really look at, because I know, Chris, that you really like this event. You really like this track.
I love this. This is my favorite, arguably my favorite track.
So this is why we're kind of diving into a few more drivers than maybe what we typically do here on the show. So Ross Chastain, 18-1. Obviously, it was in the news. Big reason why sponsorship, big deal for Trackhouse. You and I are definitely pro Trackhouse and what they're going to be doing in the future. However, Chastain, and here's where I'm kind of curious from a conversation standpoint, since Talladega, he's finished 20th or worse 6 of the last 10 races. How do we best handicap him as we go into New Hampshire? Momentum based, or very much so skewed from a mindset of we think, knowing that the one car is typically always fast. So how do we really go about betting him this week?
Well, I mean, if we look at a price, I like the price. I mean, if you were to let's just say we didn't know we were at Loudon and you just said, hey, here are the odds to win the race. And you can tell right away that with Chris Bell at 5 or 6 to 1, or just anybody, it doesn't matter. Someone at 5 or 6 to 1, automatically that it's not a super speedway. And you were to just say blindly that Chastain was going to be 8 to 1. That's probably the best bet on the board, right? I mean, of someone that can go out there and win, especially he's coming off a win at Nashville. If we were to look at this time, if you just look at straight odds, you'd say, shit, Chastain at 18 to 1 is not terrible now. But when you actually go and do some digging, it doesn't look that good. He won at Nashville, but he looked awesome in practice. And he also looked great at Gateway, and he was shit in the race. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to put my finger on this guy. I think that his price fluctuates more than anybody, week to week. The other crazy thing is if he unloads super fast and it's like not a secret, he's going to go off at 6 to 1. So I don't see him going off at 25 to 1. So if you just look at kind of his like price elasticity, there's a better chance of him going off at 5 to 1 than there is of him going off at 25 to 1. I just don't see that. He'd have to be terrible. And also, I guess it depends on where the other guys qualify. So I don't hate Chastain just based on price, but I think this is the definition of a value bet. Like, I don't think he's going to be great, but I sure as shit would rather have him at 18 to 1 and just see what happens. If, there's some cautions late, maybe he gets out in front. He's going to be tough to pass. I don't know, but I don't think it's a terrible price.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying about the price. It makes a lot of sense. I just don't know, especially with weather pending. It wouldn't surprise me if these guys would come out and just they're rockets, right? Then we'd be like, crap. Well, follow after what you're saying about, hey, maybe buy that now, dips down into single digits, something like that. So I'm personally going to be off of them for now, but might be talked into it maybe tomorrow or even leading into the weekend. So let's look at the last guy I really want to talk about, and then again get into anybody else you want to, and it is Brad Keselowski. We know Brad made the switch over to RFK last year. That team, that whole process is really starting to come to its own. We're starting to see the success of this team, and I know for a fact that this 6 car is on the cusp of a win. I just don't know where yet. Maybe it's this weekend, but he was a part of the tire test, like I mentioned way earlier in the show, where he was the representative of Ford in April. RFK getting better and better at short flats this year. 18th at Phoenix, however, had a running position of 6th. 10th at Richmond and 28th at Gateway. I know there's some people out there that are really high on Brad K. Yeah. Are you one of them?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I thought he opened at 25 to 1 at Westgate. He's he dropped down to 20. I think you can find him at 22 some places. I like Brad K. I think that a win is coming for RFK. I don't know if it's going to be the 17 or the 6, but I certainly do think that if Brad K can get up there and practice, maybe show a top 5 on the board. I mean, this guy has dominated this race in the past. I mean, dominated. Arguably some of the fastest cars I've ever seen have been Brad Keselowski at Loudon. So if they can catch a setup, I think they're obviously improving. You're getting a good payout on a good driver. If he gets out there out front, his price from a live betting perspective might not drop, immediately. But you can bet your ass if he gets out there and leads 40, 50 laps, that his odds are going to drop down to 2 or 3 to 1. So I do think that Brad has a ton of upside. I'm actually thinking about playing him myself before practice and qualifying, because if he can lay down one good lap, he'll be able to keep it up there. So I like Brad this week.
I do as well. I put a thing out there already, so I grabbed him about an hour or two ago. So I'm in on Brad K as well. How about anybody else we didn't talk about? We talked about 11 guys there, which I think is good. Anybody else or anybody that holds some maybe distinct value? Jump on now, given a number opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about AJ Allmendinger. I think he's starting to find his form a little bit. I still don't think he gets it done on this track. Or, I mean, if you want to maybe indulge yourself in a top 5, it's a heavy braking track. Typically, road course racers are pretty good here. And he was able to run kind of up front in Nashville, show a little bit of speed where he hasn't historically. And I think Kaulig's been a little bit off this year. But to see AJ kind of put a decent run together, I can't remember where he finished at Nashville, but he's at least looking faster. He's over 100-1 most places. So that would be the only other long shot I take a look at. But I think at this point we've covered kind of the guys we need to cover when it comes to the actionable items for the pod.
Well, like I said, you didn't watch last week at Atlanta, but he did finish 3rd. So AJ was up there in the mix. Would be surprised. Got 3 top 10s out of the last 4 races. So, Chris, how about you give the people an idea from a best bet perspective? What are you on, and what are you going to give the people?
All right, so I am looking at Caesars or Will Hill. There is a matchup that I think is improperly priced, and that would be Chris Buescher minus 125 on Ryan Preece. I think RFK is just as a whole, like just both those cars are running better than every SHR car other than Kevin Harvick. I think that trend kind of continues. I think that because it also is a heavy braking track, I know that this is Ryan Preece's like home track and all that, yada, yada, yada. I still think that the 17 is kind of cracking that top 10 way more consistently than Ryan Preece. I think you lock in that. Who am I taking again? Chris Buescher. Chris Buescher. Took me a second. There's a bad lightning
if you don't
here.
Mind,
like,
yes. Okay. I was going to say,
so Chris Buescher minus 125 at William Hill. Or Caesars over Ryan Preece. I just think if you just look at the body of work of the season, those 2 cars aren't even close when it comes to speed. Take Chris Buescher in that matchup for half a unit. And then when it comes to the best bet on Sunday, I think I will release that on the pre-race poll. I think that's the best way to do it. About an hour and a half before the race, I always do a live stream. You can follow me on Twitter there at Chris Werme 15, and I'll do the pre-race poll. I'll give out the pick there instead of Todd. He's chasing Simba, but that's the best bet. Is Chris Buescher minus 125 or Ryan Preece at Caesars and Will Hill.
Okay, so then before I let you go, was there anything else you wanted to touch on, or are we good to go? We gave them a lot of information. Is there anything else that we didn't discuss that you want to?
No, that was pretty much it. No, I think we got everything. Anything you want to discuss?
No, I think I'm
good. How was your first Stay Green pod?
Yeah, well, it was good until you fell asleep about 2 seconds ago.
Yeah, I had a little bit of seizure there.
Look bad
well, the lighting's bad here. I mean, it's pouring. I don't see rain. I live in Scottsdale. Like, I don't even know what this wet precipitation is falling. So,
you're like a dog,
you hear my mom screaming in the background there. So
you're hiding under a table with all that lightning. Well, you'll be okay. I can assure you, living on the East Coast,
thanks.
you'll be all right. You'll be all right later. No, but it was a good show. Listen, I'm excited. I was glad that you and Todd really asked me to be a part of this. So again, I really think some of the insights that we shared, obviously helping the betting community, but also really trying to talk these things out. You mentioned it. We do this each week alone together. So it's good to kind of get this out here midweek. So no, I'm good on my end. I'm looking forward to next week. I'm going to be in Pocono, so that'll be fun to be able to talk about that. Nice. Depending who we think is the defending champion. Is it Chase Elliott? Was it Denny Hamlin? We can go through the whole.
I don't think it's Chase Elliott. I certainly don't think that.
I don't either. So let's do this. We'll let the people go. Make sure that you're following and subscribing to the Stay Green, Bet the Board, and everything that they're doing with all NFL coming up. Make sure, and the NCAA, make sure you're getting invested with that and download the podcast. And with a Chris Buescher minus 125 ticket over Ryan Preece in hand, we will see you at the window.
Peace.